Briala Mourn was dragged into the great stone hall in chains. The heavy iron links rattled with every step, the sound echoing off the high walls like a sentence already being passed. 2 guards gripped her arms tightly, their fingers digging into her sleeves as though she might suddenly turn into something monstrous. Her black mourning veil hung low over her face, but it could not hide the tension in her shoulders or the way her bound hands curled into fists. Behind her, the massive doors slammed shut, cutting off the distant roar of the village crowd still chanting outside. Cursed widow, plague bringer, Moon's mistake. The words had followed her all the way from the village square to the citadel. Inside the hall, the entire court had gathered. Nobles in dark robes and silver jewelry lined the walls, their faces tight with fear and disgust. At the center of the chamber, beneath the great moon altar, a circle had been drawn in salt and ash. That was where they forced her to kneel. Counselor Harvin Drax stepped forward from the dais. His voice was smooth, almost courteous, but every word carried the weight of judgment. Briala Mourn, widow of Thomas Mourn, your village has suffered plague, failed crops, and the death of livestock since your husband's passing. The elders believe the misfortune clings to you. They have brought you before the Alpha King so that he may decide your fate. Briala kept her head lowered. She did not beg. She had already spent too many nights doing that in the cold of her empty house. Alpha King Odrin Veilheart sat upon the black stone throne, tall and imposing in furs and dark leather. His golden eyes rested on her without warmth. "Lift your veil," he said. Briala raised her bound hands and slowly pulled the black fabric back. The court leaned forward. Some nobles gasped. Others turned their faces away, as though her very appearance might spread the curse. Odrin studied her for a long moment. Beneath his ribs, his wolf lurched hard enough that his hand tightened on the arm of the throne. "You claim you are innocent of these charges," he said. "I am," Briala answered quietly. Her voice did not shake. "My husband is dead. I have harmed no one." Harvin Drax's jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened as he glanced once at the child-shaped shadow beneath the altar before looking back at the king. "Her husband died protecting something he should never have touched," Harvin said. "Perhaps the curse began with him, and now lives in her." Odrin's gaze flicked toward the counselor, but he did not speak. For one breath, the Alpha King looked less like a judge and more like a man who had just seen something impossible begin to unfold. Before he could give his verdict, a soft, broken sound rose from beneath the moon altar. A wet cough, then a small, pitiful whimper. Every head in the hall turned. From the shadows under the great stone altar, a tiny hand appeared, then another. A small boy, no more than 4 or 5 years old, crawled out on his hands and knees. His clothes were torn and filthy. His dark hair was matted with dust, but his eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural silver light. Gasps tore through the court. "The prince," someone whispered. "The lost heir." Odrin Veilheart rose from his throne so fast the heavy chair scraped against the stone floor. The boy ignored every noble, every guard, every horrified face. He crawled straight toward Briala. The guards instinctively reached for their weapons, but the child moved past them without hesitation. When he reached Briala, he stopped and looked up at her with those glowing silver eyes. Then he reached out with both small, dirty hands and clutched the edge of her mourning veil. Briala forgot the chains. She bent forward without thinking, one shaking hand lowering to the child's matted hair. Her fingers brushed gently over his head in a gesture that felt older than thought, older than grief. The boy pressed his face against her knee and made a soft, broken sound. The sound of a child who had been lost for a very long time, finally finding something safe. The entire hall had gone deathly silent. Odrin Veilheart stared down from the dais, golden eyes wide. For the first time since Briala had been dragged inside, the Alpha King looked as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted. Harvindrax's hand had moved to the dagger at his belt, but he had not drawn it. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the child clinging to the cursed widow. Briala did not move. She simply stayed bent over the boy, one hand still resting on his hair, shielding him with her body as though the chains and the court and the judgment no longer mattered. The cursed widow the pack had dragged in to be condemned now had the missing royal heir pressed against her like she was the only safe place left in the world. And every wolf in the great hall had fallen completely silent. The silence in the great hall was heavier than any accusation. Prince Fenric clung to Briala's mourning veil, his small body pressed against her knee as though he had finally found the only place in the world that would not hurt him. His silver glowing eyes were half closed, and a faint, broken sound, somewhere between a sigh and a whimper, escaped his lips. Briala did not move. One of her bound hands rested gently on the child's matted hair. The iron chains around her wrists dug into her skin, but she made no attempt to pull away. For the first time since she had been dragged from her village, something inside her had gone still, not calm, but focused. Alpha King Odrin Veilheart stood at the edge of the dais, staring down at the scene. His golden eyes were no longer cold. They were sharp, searching, and filled with something close to disbelief. Beneath his ribs, his wolf had gone completely still. Not in anger, but in recognition. The scent that drifted up from the child was unmistakable. It was royal blood. It was his blood. Counselor Harvindrax was the first to break the silence. "Your Majesty," he said, voice tight but controlled, "this is clearly some kind of trick. The woman must have used forbidden magic to lure the child out of hiding. We cannot allow—" "Be silent," Odrin said. His voice was low, but it carried through the entire hall like a blade being drawn. Harvin's mouth closed. His jaw tightened. Odrin descended the steps of the dais. The nobles parted before him without a word. When he reached the edge of the salt and ash circle, he stopped and looked down at Briala and the boy. The child did not look at the king. He only pressed closer to Briala, one small hand clutching her veil tighter. Odrin's gaze moved from the boy to the woman kneeling before him. "Release her chains," he ordered. The guards hesitated. Harvin's fingers twitched once toward the nearest guard, a silent command that died the moment Odrin looked his way. Odrin's voice dropped even lower. "I said release her." One of the guards stepped forward and unlocked the heavy iron cuffs around Briala's wrists. The chains fell to the stone floor with a loud clatter. Briala did not rub her wrists or stand immediately. She shifted her body slightly, shielding the child with her own as she rose to her feet. The boy made a small sound of distress when she moved, but the moment Briala's hand settled against his back, the silver glow in his eyes softened. His trembling eased. Odrin watched the change without comment, but something in his expression shifted. "Bring them to the Eastern Tower," he ordered. "They are not to be harmed. No council seal opens that door. No guard enters without my direct permission." Harvin's face went pale, but he bowed his head. "As you command, Your Majesty." Odrin looked back at Briala. His golden eyes searched her face for a long moment. "What is your name?" he asked, though he already knew. "Briala Mourn," she answered quietly. "Widow of Tomas Mourn." Odrin's gaze dropped to the boy again. "And this child, you know who he is." Briala looked down at the small head pressed against her shoulder. Her hand moved slowly, almost without thought, brushing a strand of matted hair from the child's forehead. "I do not know his name," she said, "but I know he is afraid, and I know he came to me." A murmur ran through the court. Odrin studied her for another moment, then turned to the guards. Take them. Now. As the guards gently guided Briala and the child out of the hall, the court remained silent. But the whispers had already begun. Harvindrax remained where he stood, long after they had gone. His hand had not left the hilt of his dagger, and far beneath the citadel, in the deepest part of the old dungeons, a child-sized chain dragged once across the stone. The eastern tower was colder than the great hall, but it was quiet. Briala sat on the edge of a narrow bed with Prince Fenric curled against her side. The boy had not let go of her since they left the hall. His small fingers were tangled in the fabric of her sleeve, and his breathing had finally steadied. The silver glow in his eyes had dimmed to a faint shimmer, visible only when he blinked. The room was simply furnished. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a single window that overlooked the inner courtyard. 2 guards stood outside the door, but they had not entered. Odrin's order had been clear. Briala gently brushed a strand of hair from Fenric's forehead. The child leaned into her touch without hesitation, as though he had known her all his short life. She did not understand it. She had never seen this boy before today. Yet something deep and wordless had shifted inside her the moment he crawled into her arms. A soft knock sounded at the door. One of the guards opened it without entering. Alpha King Odrin requests entry. Before Briala could answer, Odrin stepped inside. He had removed his heavy cloak. Only a dark tunic and leather vest remained. His golden eyes immediately went to the child curled against Briala's side. Fenric did not move away from her. He only watched Odrin with quiet wariness. Odrin stopped a few paces from the bed. For a long moment he simply looked at the boy. Then he spoke. Voice low. His name is Fenric. He is my son. Briala's hand stilled on the child's hair. Odrin continued, his gaze never leaving Fenric. He was taken 3 years ago. We searched every border, every rival pack, every hidden path. We found nothing. Some believed he was dead. Others said he had been sacrificed to old gods. His jaw tightened. I never stopped looking. He finally looked at Briala. And now he comes out of hiding only for you. Briala met his eyes. I did not call him, she said quietly. He came on his own. Odrin studied her face for a long moment. The mark on your wrist, he said. Show it to me. Briala hesitated, then slowly pushed up her sleeve. The black crescent mark was still there, resting against her skin like a sealed eye. Odrin did not reach for it. He only looked. That mark should have been in the old records, he said. Unless someone removed it. Briala looked down at the mark. My husband never spoke of it. But the night he died, he told me never to let Harvindrax see my wrist. Odrin's eyes sharpened. Briala continued, her voice quiet but steady. He died, protecting something. I never knew what it was. Until today. Odrin stepped closer. He stopped at the foot of the bed and looked down at his son. Fenric finally moved. He turned his head slightly and looked at his father. There was no recognition in his eyes, only caution. Odrin's hand curled into a fist at his side. He does not know me, he said quietly. It was not a question. Briala's voice was gentle. He has been afraid for a long time. Fear does not fade in a single day. Odrin looked at her again. Something in his golden eyes had changed. The cold distance was still there, but beneath it was something rawer, pain, exhaustion, and a growing, dangerous curiosity. You protected him without knowing who he was, he said, even when the entire court wanted your blood. Briala looked down at the boy. He reached for me first. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Odrin turned toward the door. No one enters this tower without my seal. If Harvindrax comes near this door, you do not open it. He looked back at her one last time. Rest, both of you. Tomorrow we will speak again." He left without waiting for an answer. When the door closed, the room felt quieter than before. Fenric shifted closer to Briala and closed his eyes. Within moments, his breathing had deepened into sleep. In his sleep, Fenric whimpered once and whispered a word Briala did not understand. "Below." She looked down at him, her hand still resting on his back. Far beneath the citadel, in the deepest part of the old dungeons, the child-sized chain dragged across the stone once more. This time it was followed by the faint sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, and very much alive. The night in the eastern tower was long and quiet. Briala sat on the bed with Fenric asleep against her side. The boy's small hands still clutched the edge of her sleeve, even in sleep. Every so often he would whimper softly and whisper that same word again. Below, each time he said it, Briala's black crescent mark would give a faint, burning pulse beneath her sleeve. She did not know what the word meant, but she could feel it pulling at something deep inside her, as though an answer was waiting just out of reach. She stayed awake long after Fenric had fallen into a deeper sleep. Her mind kept returning to the things Odrin had said. Harvin Drax. Tomas warned her never to let him see the mark. Something had been taken from Odrin 3 years ago. She looked down at the sleeping child. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead. In the dim light of the single lantern, she could see a faint silver mark on the side of his neck. A small, crescent-shaped birthmark that matched the shape of the one on her wrist. Briala gently traced it with her fingertip. "Who hid you?" she whispered. "And why did they hide you from your own father?" Fenric stirred, but did not wake. A soft knock came at the door. Briala tensed. Her first thought was of Harvin Drax. She carefully slid off the bed, making sure not to wake Fenric, and moved toward the door. "Who is it?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "It is I," came Odrin's voice from the other side. "Open the door." Briala hesitated for only a second before lifting the heavy wooden bar and opening it. Odrin stood in the corridor with 2 of his personal guards. He had changed into simpler clothes, but the tension in his shoulders had not eased. In his hand, he carried a small wooden box. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His golden eyes immediately went to Fenric sleeping on the bed. "He is still resting," Briala said quietly. Odrin nodded. He walked over to the small table and placed the wooden box on it. "I brought something," he said. "It belonged to my late wife, Fenric's mother. She wore it the night he was taken." He opened the box. Inside lay a thin silver chain with a small crescent pendant. The moment Briala saw it, her mark burned sharply. Odrin noticed her reaction. "You recognize it?" Briala shook her head. "I have never seen it before, but my mark," it reacted. Odrin picked up the pendant and held it out to her. "Take it." Briala hesitated, then slowly reached out. The moment her fingers touched the silver, the black crescent on her wrist flared with a soft silver light. The pendant in her hand answered with the same glow. Odrin watched in silence. When the light faded, Briala closed her fingers around the pendant. "Why did you bring this?" she asked. Odrin looked at his sleeping son. "Because I need to understand what is happening, and because," he paused, "because I do not trust anyone else with him right now, not even my own council." He turned to face her fully. "Harvin Drax has asked to see Fenric 3 times since sunset. I refused him each time. He is growing impatient." Briala's grip on the pendant tightened. "The night my husband died," she said, "he told me never to let Harvin Drax see the mark on my wrist. I did not understand why. I still do not, but I know Tomas was afraid." Odrin's expression darkened. "Tomas Mourn was a good man. He served as one of my border scouts. 3 years ago, he disappeared for 2 months. When he returned, he was different, quieter. He refused to speak about where he had been. 2 weeks later, he was found dead near the northern ridge. Briala's throat tightened. He never told me what happened during those 2 months. He only said that if anything happened to him, I should never let Harvindrax near our home. Odrin looked at her for a long moment. Then perhaps, he said slowly, your husband was the one who hid my son. The words settled between them like heavy stones. Briala looked over at Fenric. The boy was still sleeping, but his small hand had loosened its grip on her sleeve. If that is true, she whispered, then Harvindrax killed my husband to protect whatever secret he was hiding. Odrin did not deny it. He stepped closer to the bed and looked down at his son. His face was unreadable, but Briala could see the pain in his eyes. I have spent 3 years searching for him, Odrin said quietly, and now that he is here, he reaches for a stranger instead of me. Briala's voice was soft, but steady. He reaches for safety, not for blood. Odrin turned to look at her. And you, he said, are you safe? Briala met his gaze. I do not know what I am anymore. But I know I will not let anyone take this child again. For the first time since he entered the room, something close to a smile touched Odrin's mouth. Small, tired, but real. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small silver seal, stamped with the royal crest. Keep this with you, he said, placing it on the table. If anyone tries to enter without my direct order, show them this. If they still try to force their way in, wake me. I do not care what hour it is. Briala nodded. Odrin looked at Fenric one last time, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Briala. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for protecting my son when I could not. He left before she could reply. Briala stood in the quiet room for a long time after he was gone. She walked back to the bed and carefully lay down beside Fenric, pulling the blanket over both of them. The boy immediately curled closer to her warmth. She stared at the ceiling, the silver pendant still clutched in her hand. Sleep did not come easily. But just before dawn, Fenric stirred again in his sleep. This time, his whisper was clearer. Below, he's still there. Briala's eyes snapped open. Far beneath the citadel, in the deepest part of the old dungeons, the child-sized chain suddenly went still. And from the darkness, a low, rough voice, weak but unmistakably alive, spoke a single word into the cold air. Briala. The voice from the dungeon did not speak again, but Briala could not forget it. She spent the rest of the night sitting beside Fenric, listening to the quiet of the tower. The child slept deeply now, his small body curled against her side. Every so often, his fingers would twitch, as though reaching for something in his dreams. Each time, Briala would gently rest her hand on his back until he calmed. She did not sleep. When the first light of dawn crept through the narrow window, a knock sounded at the door. It was Odrin. He looked as though he had not slept either. His golden eyes were shadowed, and there was a new tension in the set of his shoulders. He stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. Fenric stirred at the sound but did not wake. Odrin looked at the boy for a long moment before speaking. The dungeons, he said. Something is happening down there. The guards heard a voice. A man's voice. Calling your name. Briala's hand tightened on Fenric's blanket. Odrin continued. I have ordered the lower levels sealed. But I need to see it for myself, and I want you there. Briala looked down at the sleeping child. He will not let me leave him, she said. Odra nodded. Then we take him with us. They moved quickly through the citadel. Odrin walked ahead with 2 of his most trusted guards. Briala followed, carrying Fenric in her arms. The boy had woken briefly when they left the tower, but he had only clutched her tighter and fallen back asleep against her shoulder. The deeper they descended, the colder the air became. The stone walls grew rougher, older. The torches burned with a strange blue flame. When they reached the lowest level, the guards at the entrance bowed and stepped aside. The dungeon was a long, narrow corridor lined with heavy iron doors. Most were silent, but at the very end, one cell stood open. Odrin stopped. Inside the cell, chained to the wall, was a man. His clothes were rags. His hair was long and matted. His face was gaunt, but his eyes, when they opened, were the same silver as Fenric's. Briala's breath caught. The man looked at her and smiled weakly. "Tomas," she whispered. Her dead husband. Tomas Mourn lifted his head. The chains around his wrists clinked as he tried to reach for her. "Briala," he rasped. "You kept him safe." Fenric stirred in her arms. The boy opened his eyes and looked at the chained man. "Papa," he whispered. The word hung in the air like a spell breaking. Odrin's hand went to his sword, but he did not draw it. His voice was low and dangerous. "Explain." Tomas looked at the Alpha King. "I took the boy the night Harvendrax tried to kill him," he said. "I hid him in the village. I told no one, not even my wife. When Harvin's men came for me, I fought them. They left me for dead in the northern ridge." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I survived. Barely. They brought me here in secret and chained me. Harvin wanted me alive in case the boy ever needed to be used as leverage." Briala stepped forward, still holding Fenric. "You never told me," she said, voice trembling. Tomas looked at her with sorrow in his eyes. "I could not risk it. If Harvin knew, you knew, he would have killed you too." Odrin's voice was cold. "And my son has been living as an orphan in my own lands for 3 years. Tomas nodded. "I did what I could. I made sure he was fed, hidden, safe, until the village started calling Briala a curse, until they dragged her here. I knew the only way to save him was to let her be brought before you." Fenric reached out with one small hand toward his father. Tomas's eyes filled with tears. "My prince," he whispered. Odrin looked at Briala. "You protected my son without knowing who he was," he said, "and your husband gave his life to hide him." He turned to Tomas. "You will be freed, and you will be honored for what you did." Tomas shook his head. "There is no time for honor. Harvendrax still has allies in the court. If he learns the boy is here, he will try to finish what he started." As if on cue, the sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor. One of Odrin's guards appeared, breathing hard. "Your Majesty, Counselor Harvin has gathered a group of loyal guards. They are heading this way. He claims the prisoner is dangerous and must be silenced." Odrin's hand tightened on his sword. "Bar the lower levels," he ordered. "No one gets past this point." He looked at Briala. "Take Fenric back to the tower. I will deal with Harvin." Briala shook her head. "I will not leave you here alone." Fenric clutched her tighter. Odrin looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we face this together." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Harvendrax's voice echoed down the corridor. "By order of the council, the prisoner must be executed." Odran drew his sword. Briala held Fenric close, with one arm, and placed her other hand over the black crescent mark on her wrist. The mark began to burn, and in the deepest part of the dungeon, the child-sized chain finally snapped. The corridor filled with the sound of running feet. Harvendrax appeared at the far end, flanked by more than a dozen armed guards. Their blades were drawn, and their faces were set with grim determination. Harvin's eyes immediately locked onto Briala and the child in her arms. "By order of the council," he called out, "the prisoner and the cursed woman must be silenced for the safety of the throne." Odrin stepped forward, sword already in hand. His true wolf and Nightfang moved with him, flanking him like twin shadows of death. You have no authority here, Odrin said, voice low and dangerous. Stand down, Harvin, or I will end this myself. Harvin smiled thinly. You have been compromised, my king. The woman has poisoned your mind, just as she poisoned your heir. We are saving you from yourself. He raised his hand. The guards charged. Odrin met them first. His sword flashed in the torchlight as he cut down the first man who reached him. His true wolf lunged at another, tearing through armor with savage force. Night Fang stayed close to Briala and Fenric, its massive form a living wall of shadow and silver eyes. Briala held Fenric tightly against her chest. The boy had woken at the sound of fighting and was trembling, but he did not cry. He only buried his face against her neck. The black crescent mark on Briala's wrist began to burn. She did not know how to fight. She had never been trained with a blade, but she knew how to protect. She stepped forward, one arm still wrapped around Fenric, and raised her marked wrist toward the nearest guard, who tried to circle around Nightfang. Golden silver light burst from the mark. The guard screamed as the light struck him. He dropped his sword and fell to his knees, clutching his eyes. Harvin's face twisted with fury. Kill the woman, he shouted. The child is secondary. Two guards broke through and rushed toward Briala. Nightfang intercepted one, slamming the man against the wall with bone-crushing force. The second guard raised his blade toward her. Briala did not flinch. She stepped forward and placed her marked hand against the man's chest. The light flared again. The guard cried out and collapsed, unconscious. Odrin fought like a man possessed. His sword moved in deadly arcs, and his true wolf tore through anyone who came too close. But Harvin had brought more men than expected. Several guards managed to slip past and surround them. One of them lunged at Fenric. Briala turned, shielding the boy with her body. The blade came down. It never touched her. The black crescent mark exploded with light, and the guard was thrown backward as though struck by a hammer. The light spread outward, creating a shimmering barrier around Briala and Fenric. Harvin stared in disbelief. Odrin cut down the last guard, standing between him and the counselor. He advanced on Harvin, sword dripping with blood. End this, he said. Now. Harvin backed away until his back hit the wall. His hand was still on his dagger, but he did not draw it. His eyes flicked to Briala and the child. You do not understand what you are protecting, he hissed. That boy is not just an heir. He is the key to something far older. If he lives, the old bloodlines will return, and everything we have built will burn. Odrin raised his sword, then let it burn. Before he could strike, Fenric lifted his head from Briala's shoulder. His silver eyes glowed brighter than before. The boy reached out one small hand toward Harvin. A wave of silver light shot from his fingers. Harvin screamed as the light struck him. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. The remaining guards dropped their weapons and fell back in terror. Odrin lowered his sword. He looked at Fenric, then at Briala. The boy's eyes were still glowing, but he looked exhausted. He buried his face against Briala's neck again and whispered one word. Safe. Briala held him closer. Odrin turned to the surviving guards. Take Counselor Harvin to the deepest cell. He will face judgment at first light. He looked at Briala. And you will stay with my son. No one will touch either of you again. As the guards dragged the unconscious Harvin away, Odrin stepped closer to Briala. He reached out and gently touched Fenric's hair. The boy did not pull away this time. Odrin's voice was rough with emotion. Thank you, he said to Briala, for keeping him alive when I could not. Briala met his eyes. I did not keep him alive, she said softly. I only gave him a place to rest. Odrin looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. a gesture of deep gratitude and something far deeper. The two wolves, Nightfang and his true wolf, stood guard on either side of them, but deep beneath the citadel, in the darkest cell, Harvin Drax opened his eyes. He was not unconscious, and in his hand he still held a small black shard of shadowstone. The real fight was not over. The dungeon fell silent after Harvin was dragged away. Odrin stood in the corridor, sword still in hand, blood dripping from the blade onto the stone floor. His true wolf and Nightfang remained close to Briala and Fenric, their glowing eyes scanning every shadow. Briala held Fenric tightly against her chest. The boy had stopped trembling, but his small hand still clutched her sleeve as though afraid she would disappear. His silver eyes were half closed, exhausted from the burst of power he had unleashed. Odrin turned to her. "You protected my son again," he said quietly, "even when I could not." Briala looked at him. Her voice was steady, but there was exhaustion in it. "I did not protect him alone. He protected me first." Odrin stepped closer. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Fenric's forehead. The boy did not pull away this time. He only watched his father with quiet, wary eyes. Odrin's voice was rough. "I have spent 3 years believing he was dead, and now he is here because of you." He looked at Briala. "I do not know how to repay what you have done." Briala shook her head. "You do not need to repay me. Just keep him safe. That is all I ask." Odrin studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We will return to the tower. The citadel is not safe until Harvin is dealt with." They moved quickly through the corridors. Odrin walked ahead with his 2 wolves, while Briala followed, carrying Fenric. The boy had fallen asleep again, his head resting on her shoulder. When they reached the eastern tower, Odrin posted additional guards at the door. "No one enters," he ordered. "Not even my own council. If anyone tries, kill them." The guards bowed. Inside the chamber, Odrin helped Briala lay Fenric down on the bed. The boy stirred but did not wake. Briala pulled the blanket over him and brushed his hair back gently. Odrin watched her in silence. "You are good with him," he said softly. Briala looked up. "I have always been good with children. Tomas and I, we wanted them, but the moon never blessed us." Odrin's expression softened. He stepped closer and gently took her hand. His thumb brushed over the black crescent mark on her wrist. "This mark," he said, "it is the Orphan-Moon Mark. The old texts speak of it. It is said to appear only on those who can protect the lost heirs of the royal bloodline. Those who carry it become guardians, protectors. The children find them. The children trust them." Briala looked down at the mark. "Then that is why Fenric came to me." Ordran nodded. "And that is why Harvin feared you. He knew what you were. He knew what you could do." He paused. "Tomas knew too. That is why he hid Fenric with you. He trusted you to keep him safe, even after his death." Briala's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Odrin gently wiped one away with his thumb. "You have lost so much," he said, "and still you give." Briala looked up at him. "I have nothing left to lose," she whispered. "Except him." She looked at Fenric sleeping on the bed. Odrin's hand tightened around hers. "You will not lose him," he said. "I swear it." He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. For a long moment, they stood like that king and widow, bound by a child they both wanted to protect. Then Fenric stirred in his sleep. He whispered again. "Below." Odrin pulled back slightly. "What does he mean?" Briala shook her head. "I do not know. But every time he says it, my mark burns." Odrin looked toward the door. "Then tomorrow we go below. Together, we will find whatever is waiting there." He looked back at her. "And when this is over," he said quietly, "I want you to stay. Not as a servant, not as a guardian, but as my Luna, as my mate, as the woman who brought my son back to me. Briala's breath caught. She did not answer with words. She simply leaned forward and kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, then deeper, filled with everything they had both lost and everything they had found in each other. When they parted, Odrin rested his forehead against hers again. "No more shadows between us," he whispered. "No more," she answered. But far beneath the citadel, in the deepest dungeon, Harvin Drax held the black shard of shadow stone tightly in his hand. He smiled in the darkness. The real war had only just begun. The night in the eastern tower was restless. Briala sat beside Fenric's bed, watching the boy sleep. His small hand still clutched the edge of her sleeve, as though even in dreams he was afraid she would disappear. The silver glow in his eyes had faded to a soft shimmer, but every so often he would whimper and whisper that single word again. "Below?" Each time, the black crescent mark on Briala's wrist would burn faintly. Odrin stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit courtyard. His true wolf and Nightfang lay near the door, their glowing eyes fixed on the entrance. The two wolves had not left their side since the dungeon. The silence was broken by a sharp knock. Odron's hand went to his sword. One of the guards outside spoke. "Your Majesty, Counselor Harvin Drax requests an audience. He says it is urgent." Odrin's voice was cold. "Tell him to wait until dawn. He is not to come near this tower." The guard hesitated. "He says he has something that belongs to the prince." Briala stood up slowly. Odrin looked at her, then at Fenric. "Stay here," he said. "Do not open the door for anyone but me." He stepped outside. Briala remained with Fenric. The boy stirred, his small hand tightening on her sleeve. Outside the door, Odrin faced Harvin Drax. The counselor stood with two guards, a small black box in his hands. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "I have brought something the prince needs," Harvin said. "A relic from his mother. It will help him recover." Odrin did not move. "Give it to me." Harvin smiled thinly. "It must be given directly to the boy. The magic is specific." Odrin's wolf growled low in his chest. Harvin opened the box. Inside lay a small silver pendant, the same one Odrin had shown Briala earlier. But this one was different. It pulsed with dark energy. Odrin's eyes narrowed. "That is not my wife's pendant." Harvin's smile widened. "No, it is something better. A shadow stone. It will bind the boy's power and make him obedient." He threw the pendant toward the door. The moment it touched the wood, dark energy exploded outward. The door burst open. Briala cried out as the shadow energy rushed into the room. Fenric woke with a scream. The black crescent mark on Briala's wrist flared with brilliant light. She threw herself over the boy, shielding him with her body. The light from her mark met the shadow energy and burned through it. Harvin stepped into the room, his eyes wild. "You should have died in the pit," he snarled at Briala. "You and that cursed mark." Odrin charged into the room, sword drawn. His true wolf and Nightfang attacked Harvin's guards. Briala held Fenric tightly as the shadow energy tried to reach him. Her mark burned hotter than ever. Golden silver light poured from her, pushing back the darkness. Harvin raised the real shadow stone, a larger, darker shard. "This ends now," he said. He slammed the stone against the floor. A wave of crushing shadow energy exploded outward. Odrin was thrown back against the wall. Briala screamed as the darkness tried to tear Fenric from her arms. But she did not let go. The black crescent mark on her wrist exploded with light. The Orphan-Moon Mark fully awakened. A brilliant silver shield formed around her and Fenric, pushing back the shadow energy. The light grew brighter, burning away the darkness Harvin had summoned. Harvin screamed as the light struck him. The shadow stone in his hand cracked and shattered. The darkness vanished. Harvin fell to his knees, defeated. Odrin pushed himself up and walked over to him. He placed his sword at Harvin's throat. "It is over," he said. Harvin looked up at him, blood running from his mouth. "You think this is victory?" he whispered. "The old shadows are waking. The real war has only just begun." Odrin did not answer. He looked at Briala. She was still holding Fenric, the light from her mark slowly fading. The boy was safe in her arms, his eyes wide but no longer glowing with fear. Odrin stepped over to them and knelt. He gently touched Fenric's cheek. The boy looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached out and took his father's hand. Odrin's eyes filled with tears. Briala smiled softly. The three of them, King, Luna, and Prince, stood together in the quiet tower as the first light of dawn crept through the window. But far beneath the citadel, in the deepest part of the old dungeons, the broken shadow stone began to glow again, and something ancient stirred. The broken shadow stone continued to glow in the deepest dungeon. Harvin Drax lay unconscious in his cell, but the shard in his hand pulsed with dark energy. The guards watching him did not notice the thin black tendrils spreading across the floor like veins. In the eastern tower, Briala sat with Fenric on her lap. The boy had finally fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep. His small hand still rested on her arm, as if even in dreams he needed to know she was there. Odrin stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn break over the citadel. His true wolf and Nightfang lay near the door, their eyes half closed but alert. He turned to Briala. "Harvin will be judged at first light," he said. "The council has already been informed. They will not protect him this time." Briala looked down at Fenric. "And Morvisa?" Odrin's voice was cold. "She is being held in the northern tower. She will face the same judgment." He walked over and knelt in front of Briala and the boy. He gently touched Fenric's hair. "I have spent 3 years believing my son was dead," he said quietly. "And now he is here because of you." Briala met his eyes. "I did not bring him back," she said. "He found his own way. I only gave him a place to rest." Odrin reached out and took her hand. His thumb brushed over the black crescent mark on her wrist. "This mark," he said, "it saved my son. It saved me. It saved this kingdom." He looked at her with something deep and unguarded in his golden eyes. "I do not want you to leave," he said. "Not as a servant, not as a guardian, but as my Luna, as my mate, as the woman who brought light back into my life." Briala's breath caught. She looked down at Fenric, then back at Odrin. "I have nothing left to give," she whispered, "except my heart." Odrin leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with everything they had both lost and everything they had found in each other. When they parted, Odrin rested his forehead against hers. "No more shadows between us," he said. "No more," she answered. But far beneath the citadel, the broken shadow stone in Harvin's hand flared with sudden, violent light. The guards outside his cell screamed as dark energy exploded outward. The entire citadel shook. Odrin pulled back from Briala, his eyes wide. "The dungeon," he said. He stood and drew his sword. "Stay here with Fenric," he said. "I will end this." Briala stood up, still holding Fenric. "I will not stay behind," she said. "Not this time." Odrin looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Together they moved toward the door. Nightfang and Kadric's true wolf followed. As they stepped into the corridor, the citadel shook again. From the direction of the dungeons, a deep, unnatural howl rose, not from any wolf they knew. Harvin Drax had awakened something far worse than the first shadow, and it was coming for them all. The citadel shook as the awakened shadow rose from the dungeons. It was not a single creature. It was a storm of darkness, countless red eyes and writhing tendrils that tore through stone and steel alike. Harvindrax's final act had torn open the deepest seal, releasing something the old kings had buried for a reason. Odrin, Briala, and Fenric stood together in the great hall as the shadow poured in through the lower corridors. The two wolves, Nightfang and the true wolf, stood in front of them, growling with ancient fury. Briala held Fenric tightly against her chest. The boy was awake now, his silver eyes wide with fear but no longer trembling. He trusted her. Odran drew his sword. "This ends today," he said. The shadow lunged. Odrin and the two wolves met it head-on. His blade cut through the darkness, while the wolves tore into it with fang and claw. But every wound they inflicted closed almost instantly. The shadow was too vast, too old. Briala stepped forward. The black crescent mark on her wrist, now a full glowing circle, burned with brilliant light. She raised her hand, and the Orphan-Moon Mark awakened completely. Golden silver light exploded outward from her, meeting the shadow storm. The two forces collided in the center of the great hall. The shadow screamed. Fenric reached out with one small hand and placed it over Briala's marked wrist. The light grew brighter. The Orphan-Moon Mark was not just protection. It was judgment. The light burned through the ancient shadow, tearing it apart piece by piece. The red eyes dimmed and vanished. The writhing tendrils dissolved into smoke. Harvindrax, who had been hiding in the shadows, screamed as the light reached him. The final shard of shadow stone in his hand shattered completely. When the light faded, the great hall was silent. The shadow was gone. Harvindrax lay dead on the stone floor, his body unmarked but his eyes wide with terror. Odrin lowered his sword. He turned to Briala and Fenric. The boy reached out for his father. Odrin took him into his arms for the first time in 3 years. Fenric buried his face against his father's neck and whispered one word, "Papa." Odrin's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Briala. "You brought him back to me," he said. "You brought us all back." Briala stepped closer. Odrin pulled her into the embrace, holding both her and Fenric. The court, which had gathered in fear, now watched in awe. One by one, they knelt. Odrin looked out over them. "This woman is no curse," he said. "She is the Orphan-Moon Luna. She is my mate. She is the heart of this pack, and from this day forward she will stand beside me as queen." The court cheered. In the months that followed, the moonlit pack changed forever. The old laws that had judged worth by strength and bloodline alone were rewritten. Briala's quiet compassion and the power of the Orphan-Moon Mark became symbols of protection for the weak and the lost. The cursed and the forgotten were no longer cast aside. Odrin ruled with a balance of strength and mercy he had never known before. His wolf was whole. His family was complete. One quiet spring evening, Briala and Odrin stood on the highest balcony overlooking the blooming packlands. Fenric played at their feet with the two wolves, Nightfang and his true wolf, now inseparable guardians. Odrin wrapped his arms around Briala from behind, his hand resting gently over her slightly rounded belly. "Our child will never know what it means to be called a curse," he murmured against her hair. Briala smiled and leaned back into him. "And they will never have to wonder if they are wanted," she whispered. Fenric looked up at them and smiled. The boy who had once crawled from beneath an altar had found his family. The woman the pack had called a curse had become its greatest light. Their love had not been born of perfect circumstances. It had been forged in chains, broken stones, ancient shadows, and the courage to choose each other when the world tried to tear them apart. It was a love that taught an alpha king that true strength lies not in control but in protection. And in the heart of the moonlit pack, a strong, steady flame burned bright, one that would never be allowed to die again.